Hello and welcome to the Life After Diets podcast. I'm Sarah Dosanjh, psychotherapist and author of the book, I Can't Stop Eating.
And I'm Stefanie Michele, binge recovery health coach. If you feel out of control around food, we get it because we've been there.
Thank you for joining our conversations about how to make peace with food and feel more comfortable in our bodies.
Now on to this week's episode.
Hi, Steph.
Hi, Sarah.
Today we're going to talk about consistency, aren't we?
Yes.
I'm glad you're in agreement. And before we begin, I just want to give a shout out to Andrea from Chile, who contacted us with this request. I think it's a really helpful subject to dive into because whenever we're trying to do anything new, consistency is a large part of it. Right? It's not easy to do something new. We have to be able to keep coming back to this new thing that we're trying to do. And that is consistency, at least how I understand it. What about you, Steph?
Well, I think it's part of like what, quote unquote, the mastery of something, right? Or habit building, or, I mean, there's something about consistency as a value that's built into that idea. When this topic came up and I thought about it, I was thinking about, obviously in terms of with food, and I was thinking how consistency at one point in my life would have felt like I need to establish consistency with food as far as honoring my hunger and fullness or having self-compassion or something like that, there's some sort of like thing I have to do to become consistent. And that can feel like a good amount of pressure on me.
Mm-hmm.
Like it feels like I have to show up. It's being asked to show up in this way that feels that I think I used to just inherently reject.
Mm-hmm.
Still do in some cases.
I think my story about myself for the longest time is that I'm not a consistent person. And that really held me back in the recovery process for a long time, because every time I felt like I blew it, it was always the voice in my head going, well, of course you were never going to stick at that. What on earth made you think you could do this? And I would believe it over and over again. So I would hear this new idea or even an old idea, and it was something that I wanted to start doing because I thought it was going to help me with my relationship with food. I'd get excited about it, but the minute that excitement and the momentum wore off, I just sort of fell back into old ways. And I hear this when people are sharing their stories with us, that they feel like it's a step forward and then 2 steps back again. Do you think you're generally a consistent person? Would you say that that is a personality trait of yours?
It depends which me you're talking about. I mean, when you first asked me, I'm like, no, because I can be all over the place. But I also recognize that there's many ways in which I consistently do show up. I don't know if that's learned lately or like in the past 5 years, but I think there's other ways in my life that I have been consistent. So I don't think it's a static trait. I think it depends on the context of it. If I feel that I have to be consistent about something, I won't be. But if it's something that is intrinsically motivating to me, then I will be. And I also tend to feel like if you call attention to any way that I'm consistent, I will stop being consistent. I feel like I'm always waiting for the other shoe to drop on that. It's like, I'm only consistent up to this point, but I'm about to not be. Like, there's nothing about, well, that's kind of part of what I was thinking of with this conversation. There is a way in which consistency has established itself for me, or how I define it differently now, that is consistently showing up for me, which is it's almost like, I think with the idea of consistency, it's almost like you can't make mistakes. And I think it is about making mistakes, quote unquote mistakes, and showing up again. And it's that, to me, which is the consistency of not about being the subject of what the goal is, but the actual just being inside of the goal itself and showing up for it. Mm-hmm. That, to me, is where my consistency seems to be pretty stable now. And it asks much less of me than producing something or achieving something or having this tangible result that sort of consistency is I identify that with, and just simply being there, just simply getting up again.
I think my natural temperament was always to be very outcome oriented. And for me, the shift happened and I was able to be more consistent when I saw it as the goal was consistency. Mm-hmm. But for the longest time, I would always have this idea of this end result. And that would just mess up the process. And it really ties in with the whole dieting and weight loss. Every time I focused on weight loss as this outcome, that was when the whole process got messed up to me and I started binge eating again. It's difficult to talk about consistency without mentioning accountability, because I think this is something that many people use to get themselves to be consistent. And how might we think of this healthy level of accountability, or is it ever healthy to find external accountability? Because that's what diets do as well. That's what slimming clubs, where you meet with other people, there's that community and accountability aspect. And I've definitely used accountability to help myself to be more consistent. And I've also been able to do it without accountability now on certain things. But unless I can find a way to enjoy the process,
right,
if I don't have accountability, I can't do it. So YouTube's a classic example for me. When I started doing it, I just made the decision, I want to do this every week for a year and see what happens and make a decision from there. It was never about, I'll do it till I get X amount of subscribers or all these other things that are outside of my control. The only thing I can have the influence on is whether I show up every week and do a video. And that desire to be good at something already, that perfectionism gets in the way of consistency, because it's really hard to show up when you don't feel like you're doing as good a job as you think you should. Those early YouTube videos, I watched one because I did a video about consistency a couple of years ago. So I watched that this morning, and those early videos, I look like a deer in the headlights. I'm just looking at the camera. My face isn't moving. I'm trying not to make any mistakes because I don't understand how to edit. But at the time, I think this has helped me with consistency. I think there's a certain level of self-delusion about me sometimes. At the time, I thought, oh, this is great. Why isn't this breaking the internet?
And now you know?
Now I know. I'm like, oh, yeah. It was like I was afraid to look away from the camera because I thought that would be disconnecting. But instead, I just look a bit weird and scary.
I'm going to look. I'm going to look at right after this. I can't wait. I've had the same with closet coaching when I go back to those and I'm like, what? I can't believe people saw that. I can't believe people were watching that and that I put that up there. But then it's calling into question, what's the true goal of the outcome you're looking to be consistent with? So I'll use this as an example with this work because I have daily episodes of closet coaching on Instagram. And I had an idea of showing up consistently Monday to Friday. And there's been times along the way where I've had lots of things going on in life, or I have not been feeling well or whatever it is. And there's been weeks that are harder. And I realized, I guess, along that way that the goal isn't necessarily to show up Monday to Friday. The goal is to do something organically or to do something that feels good in a way that is sustainable. And that maybe it's a consistency of checking in with self, of showing up in a way that feels like it's true to me, like it's authentic to me. And so kind of looking at that even with food, as far as when I think about like not even the earlier days of my recovery, but even in the middle somewhere, there were times where I was emotionally eating after the binges had stopped. And it was more about just keep going, just keep moving. But the consistency was about me just showing up again and again and next day and the next day and not restricting and not, falling into my patterns that would produce my binging. It was just staying with myself.
It's a tricky line. And I'd be curious about your thoughts, because for me, there is something about needing to enjoy the process. And there is sometimes pushing myself a bit when I don't necessarily feel like it. And then there are times when now's not the time to push myself. So again, with YouTube, I have to be in a certain state to be able to do it. So there are weeks when I haven't put a video up. And sometimes I vary the day that I do it as well, because it has to be a moment where I feel a certain way. That said, there have been times where I don't feel like it, and I will still sit down and try. I will still try and get myself into that state. And again, I'm reluctant to use the word discipline, but there is an element sometimes when we push ourselves to do things for the sake of being consistent that don't feel good. We don't feel like doing them. And how do we get ourselves to do those things without bulldozing ourselves, like so many people have with food, to just try and make themselves stick to something, to just try to exercise this discipline regardless of how it feels? It's almost like when you do that, how you feel doesn't matter. But when you go the other way, it's almost like the only thing that matters is how you feel.
Yeah. I think there's a huge consideration of context with consistency, that there's this idea that you do something at all costs, regardless of your context, regardless of if it makes sense for you today.
Mhm.
Um, and I think consistency can incorporate, we talked about red light, yellow light, green light days. So I have this construct of some days are red light days, some days are yellow light. I think you guys call them amber light, do you?
Mhm.
And green light, where there's some days where we have more resources, we have more capacity, we have more openness and more time, whatever it might be. And that these are days where asking ourselves to do something, to show up, is easier and it is more productive. And then there's red light days where we have very limited capacity, energy, we're more triggerable, and it's more about surviving and taking care of oneself and not pushing oneself too hard and too fast to throw ourselves out of our zone. And of course, somewhere in the middle. And that knowing where you are on any given day is information we need, and consistency will apply differently then. It will look different based on your context of that day. And that I don't think consistency is about showing up the same way every single day. It's about knowing who you are and where you are and showing up in the capacity that you can.
I think where I would have struggled, as I might have been trying to be consistent with something, but also trying to look after myself as well. So the minute perhaps it was hard, or I hit those challenges, or I ran out of the motivation, in the moment, it felt like the kindest thing to do was to not be consistent, but then I wouldn't be able to get myself back to it. And I think this might be what goes on for people, I'm guessing, some people anyway, when it comes to food. This whole, when do I push? This reminds me of the exercise episode that we did, because we talked about that there a bit. And for me, it was always about needing a really small bar. And that's why consistency was then the goal. So when I started meditating, like the bare minimum was I had to do 1 minute was the minimum. And I almost always did a lot more. But without that bare minimum, on a day where I felt tired or not well, or any number of reasons when I wasn't feeling great in myself, it needed to still be not harmful to myself, to push myself to still do the thing. One thing that's popping into my head, because something I encourage people to do, even though I was very resistant to it myself, but having become more consistent, really seeing the value, and I see the value in other people do it as well, is the idea of journaling. This checking in and trying to capture on paper, to get out of your head what's going on in your head, particularly when you're in those moments, like after a binge or even before one, if you can. That's not always possible, but it's that checking in and writing things down. And what I often see is people will do this, they'll try this, and they come back and they go, oh my goodness, like I've seen all these things, and it provides all this information and all these things to work with. And then often just a week or two later, the consistency of that evaporates, and now they're beating themselves up because they haven't kept on top of, or however they might word it, kept on top of this idea of journaling, just as an example, because I think that's a really helpful tool for a lot of people in recovery that isn't specifically about changing your behavior with food.
I don't know. When I hear it, I'm thinking, because journaling is something that I actually don't do very much. Surprise, surprise. I love giving journal prompts. It's my favorite thing to do is create them, but I don't actively journal, and I've wanted to. And I guess what I'm thinking of is, do you think there's a part of and I think this will go both ways, but is there a part of yourself that knows when you need something and when you want something? And is there a part of you that knows that you don't? Because I process through talking so much. And so it's kind of like, I want to journal, but why? Like, what is the actual reason that I want to? And are we aligned with that reason all the time?
Mhm.
So if I don't feel like I need to journal, then maybe that's why I'm not showing up to do it.
I wouldn't know when I needed to, because quite often I'm not aware of that. So the consistency of it, and I have a little A5 electronic notebook that I use to journal, and I just have to do a minimum of a page a day. So that's a small page, and I can write big if I want to. So there are some days where I write and I'm just annoyed about the fact that I have to write, but I get myself to sit and write, and I can do it in 2 minutes and then it's done.
Mhm.
But I need that consistency, because there are days when I sit down with that pen or stylus, whatever you call it. And when I start writing, I realize, gosh, all this stuff was going on and I had no idea. And if I didn't have that consistency of journaling, that's the kind of stuff that would build up in the background that I wouldn't even be aware of. And then I'd be acting out my behavior through trying to
Okay.
distract more.
So I think it's looking at what is your mission in journaling? What is the point of it for you? What does it do for you?
For me, it enables me to process stuff when I don't realize there's something to process. And sometimes when I do, because sometimes I am aware and might choose to, but most of the time it's just because that's what I do every day.
Okay.
And because I check in and I keep acknowledging where I'm at, I don't get what used to feel like this buildup of all this, just all this unprocessed stuff going on, like feelings I haven't acknowledged. There's something for me when I acknowledge a feeling, not always, but a lot of the time that releases it. If I do it with all the small stuff, it keeps releasing it so that my pot isn't filling up without me realizing.
So how important is it to you to do that in your life? Like on a scale of 1 to 10?
And at the moment, I would say a 9.
Okay. So when something, and I like that you said at the moment, because if in this moment it's a 9, does that then propel you to be more consistent with it?
I think when I'm saying at this moment a 9, I mean that in my whole meta view of my
Mhm.
life, not
Oh,
just
okay.
necessarily thinking that would vary from day to day. At the moment, the way I'm thinking and feeling about journaling is that it's only become that consistent since October when I started doing the Artist Way with a group of other therapists and you had morning pages. That's what got me to do it consistently. Before I used to dip in as and when, and I've noticed the advantages of doing it regularly have helped. But if I wasn't getting advantages from it and if I wasn't getting
Right.
something back, then it would be quite difficult to do. But also if I
Right.
hadn't been in that group with the therapist, I still don't think I would have stuck at it. We're checking in every week, so I have to say, oh, I haven't done my journaling.
But you set it up for yourself. And I think
Mhm.
that means something. You knew to use accountability to have it happen because there was something about you that knew it was important and that there was going to be a reward from it. And I think that that's a resourcefulness that we don't sometimes give ourselves credit for. Like I am not journaling currently regularly, even though maybe I would be getting something from it. And I'm sure I would, but I am not. But it's not something I feel compelled to do at this moment in time. And if I did, I trust that I would find a way. I trust that I would find an accountability group because I would benefit from that as well. And is it about sort of just knowing when you need something and trusting yourself to implement the resources that will move you along on that? Because at any given time, we could need so many things. And is it a matter of what we're prioritizing our needs to be and identifying with that?
I think I don't trust that I know what I need.
Well, yeah, really? Because you're able to, I mean, how did you know you needed journaling and how did you get to the point of joining a group about it? There was something that propelled you to that.
I didn't know it was going to be about journaling. I just wanted to do the Artist Way because I was trying to write my second book and I was blocked. So I wanted to get creatively unblocked. I didn't know that that was necessarily going to
So maybe
entail
that was it. There's
journaling.
something about you that knew to go there, whether you knew what the medium would be or not. You knew that you were looking for something and you knew where to go find it.
Maybe, I don't know. I guess when it comes to consistency, we're always getting feedback in what we're doing. So there's something in this recovery journey that a lot of people are on, recovery from disordered eating, giving up dieting, where as we're trying to, and maybe people can relate to this, I could only carry on being more consistent at this giving up dieting business because I had that experience of, okay, I'm not going to focus on weight loss. And I saw that my eating became more balanced. So I think there's something about when we're trying to be consistent with something to pay attention to what that positive feedback is. Whether it's the journaling, and a lot of days I might not feel like it, I'm conscious that there is this positive, a reward or something coming back. So consistency does require a certain amount of momentum. So whether the consistency is enjoying the process or that you are seeing something different as a result of your efforts, I think that is an important experience to have in order to be able to hang on to that and to keep coming back to it when we feel like we've, excuse the diet phrase, fallen off the wagon and trying to get back to where we were.
Well, what if we're talking about someone who's thinking, well, I want to eat in a more quote unquote healthy way. because it makes my body feel better and I do receive reward from that. And it's not happening. I'm being inconsistent, because I would imagine that would be a reason that this theme would come up. How do you differentiate between just simply knowing something is good for you, or even feeling like, yes, I feel when it's good for me, and not being able to do it despite that?
Mhm. Well, the thing that you're doing that's not that, whether it's binging or whatever it is that you're doing instead of that thing you're saying, is also giving you some kind of reward and performing some kind of function. So if you're saying to yourself, I'm trying to make these changes in the way that I eat to support my well-being, and it's not sticking and you're going back into binge eating, it's like, what's going on? What is going on with that? And consistency does tie in with habits and routine as well. Are there ways that you can support yourself that involve making fewer decisions around food as well? In terms of, I'm going to have a breakfast, a lunch, and a dinner, and these are the foods I'm going to have around to choose from. There are ways to manipulate your environment to support consistency as well.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm applying this even in my own life. I'm thinking about recently that I had, after we moved, my food took on a different sort of character just for ease and convenience. And after a while, I wanted to bring more produce back into my habitual routine, which normally it had been. And I have established habits around that were already there. And so I intentionally brought some of those habits back in. And throughout the winter, as things have ebbed and flowed in, it's a pandemic, my mood has been up and down, there's been different factors at play. And so sometimes integrating those habits have been easier. And then there have been other times where they've been more difficult. And for me, the consistency is not about, oh, I'm mad at myself because I didn't show up every single day, every single week with the foods that nourish my body. It was more like there were times in which I used my habits in my environment by, I had these foods in my house and I used them and that's what I did. And then there were weeks where that was harder. And so when you're talking about what I was doing instead, there were times where I just needed convenience. There were times where I needed it to be easy and I didn't have the time to be preparing foods in another way. And it was about not making meaning of that. And it was like, okay, well, when my resources were more available to me, I kind of got back into it. And it was the consistency of that showing up rather than it needing to look a certain way and be an everyday, daily, like, now that I've made this decision, this is what it is every day. And more of respecting this, when I use my habits and when I don't, and when I can and when I can't, and not making meaning of it. To me, that's the way that consistency has changed for me as far as the expectations of self and the expectations of what needs to happen. It's just more of the respect of that ebb and flow.
Mm-hmm. It's coming back to yourself, right? And back to
Yeah.
these intentions. I know for me, whenever I felt like I was going off track, when I was trying to find more balance with food, there were so many resources I would go back to help me come back. So whether it was certain YouTube videos or podcasts or Facebook groups, or even I can imagine people using our podcast in that way. They felt chaotic and out of control around food and they're trying to get themselves back in. I might go, okay, I'm going to listen to an episode. Let me find a topic that feels relevant to where I am now. That's how I imagine people using it. That's how I think I would have used a subject such as this. So I think sometimes with consistency, it can be hard to do it just with our own mind, to remember the new things that we're trying to practice.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so great that we have the kind of resources that we do today, all over the place, from social media to YouTube to podcasts to books to.
Yeah.
There are a lot of voices in this field now. And I think finding voices that resonate with what it is that you're trying to create, coming back to those places, will help you to be consistent. Yeah.
We hope you're enjoying this episode of the podcast. We just want to take a minute of your time to let you know we're now on Patreon. If you would like to support our work and be a part of our growing community, please head to patreon.com/lifeafterdiets.
All of our patrons are invited to join us in our Life After Diets private Facebook group to connect with us and other like-minded souls. For more details about how to contact us or to work with Sarah or Steph individually, please check out the show notes. Now let's get back to the episode. Who is it who said to err is human?
I don't know.
I don't want to say it's like Shakespeare or someone like that, but it's very human to go off track.
It up.
It's very human to go off track and to get distracted and to veer off this path, to be able to stay focused. And there's a lot of conversations happening at the moment about how we're losing our focus even more because of the way technology is set up. So no wonder when it comes to trying to focus on this new thing, we're being bounced around from all this different information everywhere. We're bombarded all the time, even with there's different schools of the anti-diet movement, and there's all these people in between who are trying to take a bit of both, and then there's the diet people trying to get your attention. So no wonder there's a struggle to stay focused on what it is you're trying to do when you've got so many different voices in your ear telling you what you should be doing.
Yeah, and even just like a respect for our resources. So I have had clients who were exercise. Exercise is one of those that comes in with consistency, the idea of that, these two topics. And where I've seen people run themselves into the ground about, or really beat themselves up for not being as consistent with exercise as they want to be when they're trying to initiate movement and trying to connect with their bodies in this way. And meanwhile, they're working 2 jobs and they've got a family and they're not really sleeping at night. And there's all these things. And it's like, but I should be able to do this 3 times a week. I should be able to do that. And it's this idea of context, of looking at all of the demands of life right now and in your moment in time and then the season of life that you're in. And are we factoring in all of those things as well when we're expecting something of ourselves that maybe has been prescribed as that enough times a week? Who says, like what purpose is it serving? And maybe, I do have a client who said, when I move a certain, amount of times, I feel best. I feel good. And then it became a matter of, okay, creating the habits around it. And I think also there was a bit about, okay, well, we also have to untangle the meaning of movement. And are there still ideas about that being something you do to deserve something or to like something you have to do? And that was a piece of it. So I think where consistency is inconsistent, sometimes it's because there's a reason for that. When all other efforts are there and there's still some sort of like, it's just not sticking, maybe there's something more to the not sticking that has to do with a belief underneath it or an expectation or pushing against something else, that there's a conflict there of some sort, and looking at that and being open to those answers as well as to why something is a bit difficult.
Mm-hmm. So when I'm trying to get myself to do something that I think I need to do and there's that resistance, first of all, I'm asking myself, do I really need to do the thing? If the answer is yes, because sometimes it is, like my taxes, it would be, how do I coax myself to do this? And that's a phrase that I often use with myself. How do I coax myself to do this thing that I really believe is going to be something that I either need to do or I'm going to benefit from doing it? And I think so often people beat themselves up about the fact that they're not doing it, because I don't understand why I'm not doing this thing that I know will help me, or I did it before and it helped me. Why can't I do it now? And the more you start telling yourself why you can't, you've got to come up with reasons for why you can't. And those reasons are normally, I'm inconsistent, I don't stick at anything, I'm this, I'm that. As long as those beliefs are very active, you won't be able to, or you're still going to struggle with doing the thing that you're trying to get yourself to do. So for me, that word coax works really well. I don't know how that word sits with you, because I know it means different things to different people.
Yeah, I don't know that I would use coax. To me, it sounds like I'm being tricked. I coax myself into it. I'm a fan of breaking things into smaller parts and lowering expectations. So when there is something that I'm resisting somehow, I explore the resistance. But if it's okay, like it is something I want to get into, I'll say, okay, well, obviously something about this is overwhelming me. So can I make this smaller? And so can I just think of what would be the first step of integrating this behavior or practice into my life? What's the first thing I can do? And that's all I'm responsible for this week. An example of this might be, at one point I wanted to get into a certain type of exercise for my bone density. And so it was like, well, there's something overwhelming about joining this class, and it's new people and it's a new place and it's going to interrupt my schedule. There were so many reasons. So it was like, okay, well, the first thing I would have to do is just go onto their website and look around. And that's all I was responsible for in the beginning, was just that piece. And then it was about, okay, and then all I have to do is sign up for one class and make once a week to go there. And it was just taking these things in more manageable chunks and no expectations beyond that part was a way that I dipped into the water of something and then got comfortable there so that I could go to the next level and then the next. And then that's sort of how I would ease into something instead of a demanding of myself that I do something and do it all and do it now. It's too much. It's too overwhelming, depending on the subject.
Yeah, I've definitely done that as well. And like you, it has to be, I can only break it down that small if I give myself a level of permission to not keep going with it.
Yeah.
Like I just have to do this one thing. I just have to. I've been coaching a therapist recently about her getting her course up. She's feeling overwhelmed with everything she's got to do. And I said, just this week, all we got to do is brainstorm. Just a pen and paper, and you're just going to brainstorm some ideas for it. That's it. Because there's so much to learn with anything new. And I think exactly this journey can feel overwhelming. What are the small things? Because that's where it starts, with consistency. And on the exercise one, I mentioned my yoga practice began with 5 minutes of stretching a day. And I did that for about 18 months of just 5 minutes a day. That was it. And the all or nothing, black and white thinking is going to go, that's not enough. That's not enough.
I was just thinking that.
Watch out for it. Yes. Watch out for it.
To be right at the end of December, I always have a pile of books on my nightstand, and I'm notorious for, like, I read them in scattered ways. There's nothing linear about it, and it's always very haphazard. And I said to myself, I really would like to read more consistently. And so I started picking up a book, and this wasn't a resolution. It was just happened to be at this time because I had off that week. So I started doing that, and I was consistent in the beginning, and then I stopped, and I noticed that I stopped. And I know that there was a point where I would have been like, oh, I broke it. I didn't do it. I'm inconsistent with reading. Instead, in that moment, I remember like watching myself do this, like little pat on my own back, and just like, oh, okay, I'll pick it up right now. Like, okay, I'll do it now, and I'll just read a couple minutes right now. And I did that, and the next night I didn't, and then the next night I didn't, and then it's like, I forgot about that. I'll do that again. And it's again this idea of bringing myself back without beratement and without meaning making about, oh, I have fallen off. That means this. It's like, oh, well, I'm here now. Okay, so what can I do now in this moment to reestablish some consistency? And the very small, I mean, I literally read like for 2 minutes because my kids come in. But it was just that. And that's sort of how it's progressed. I mean, it's only end of January, but it's just like when I can, I do. And when I'm not, I don't stay there. It's kind of like, well, that's not where I am now. I'm here now. So can we now? And I think it's about this idea of the perfectionism and also the self-talk around that.
How can we encourage people listening to this to not be so hard on themselves about their levels of consistency? Because that, to me anyway, is one of the things that blocks consistency, like you were just saying, the way that we speak to ourselves. And we can try and reassure people and tell them they don't need to be as hard on themselves, but how do we convince them, Steph?
Well, it worked for me.
And it worked for me too. Just give yourself a break.
Give yourself a break.
And remember that I ask you the question and then I start answering. You go.
I think there's power in recognizing that you only have the moment you're in. So if you're tempted to start thinking about how you've not been consistent, that time might be better well spent getting back in the present moment instead of reflecting on what you haven't been doing in the past and showing up right now. Whether that means doing a thing right now or simply re-engaging in the mental file of doing that thing now and maybe planning a small step or something like that, that you always have the present moment to do something, always at any given moment.
Yeah. And also to reassure you that we forget when we're trying to do something new. I don't know about you, Steph, but quite often I'll forget if it's this vague intention. I just don't remember. And then a week's gone by, I try and catch it. But I'm saying to myself, why didn't I do that thing that I was going to do? Instead of how can I remember? How can I remind myself? Sometimes there can be practical things to shift in your environment, timers, all these kinds of things. And I mentioned on a previous podcast episode as well, sometimes if I have a thought at night about something I want to remember, I will throw something into the middle of the room and that will remind me, because why is my hairband in the middle of the room? I've known people before when they've wanted to start checking in with themselves around their eating to put post-its in places, even just blank post-its that you know what that pink post-it means in the cupboard or at your desk or wherever it is that you want to place it, that is going to remind you of some of these new things.
Intentions.
New intentions that you are trying to put into practice. Do you know what would really help me be more consistent, Steph, with this podcast?
Ratings and reviews.
How did you guess?
Because I can hear in your voice now when you have a little funny little quip.
So yes, people, ratings and reviews, please. And hit the follow button, hit the subscribe button. If you're struggling to write a review, nice ladies, worth a listen, 5 stars. This is 0 effort. It'll take you like 30 seconds and it helps us out a lot. And I know we keep saying it, but we're just consistent.
We're consistent.
We're consistently asking for reviews because that's how you get them.
And until next time, we'll see you next time.
See you next time. Love you. Bye.
Okay, thanks. Bye.